At 34, Danielle Hart wasn't chasing headlines. She wasn't trying to change the world. She was simply trying to survive the night shift at the Rose Bridge in a crumbling hotel tucked into the forgotten corners of South Bronx. The carpets were stained, the vending machine 8 quarters, and the only thing consistent about her paycheck was how late it arrived. But Danielle showed up anyway. Night after night, she poured lukewarm coffee for lonely travelers, folded towels in dim hallways, and held together a place most people had already written off. In a world that had never given her anything easily, she was the glue in a building falling apart. But everything changed at 3:12 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. She had just finished mopping the back hallway when she noticed movement outside through the cracked front window. A man, tall, expensive-looking, and very much out of place, was hunched near the curb, rain cascading down his $1,000 coat. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch when lightning flashed overhead. Then suddenly he collapsed face first into the wet pavement. Danielle didn't hesitate. She didn't ask questions or call for backup. She grabbed an umbrella, raced out into the storm, and hoisted him up with both arms as two strangers across the street, hooded and lurking, started closing in. She didn't wait to find out what they wanted. With strength that surprised even herself, Danielle dragged the unconscious man toward the service entrance, slipping through just as the two men reached the sidewalk. Inside, soaked and panting, she eased him onto a bench by the laundry room. He smelled of whiskey and money. His wallet had fallen. His watch still ticked. And his idence, she checked, revealed a name she knew only from magazine covers: Harrison Vale, billionaire investor, and the kind of man who never ended up in places like this. Danielle could have called the police. She could have called an ambulance. But instead, she called a cab. She paid for the ride out of her own pocket. She made sure he got home safe. No questions, no favors, no credit, just kindness. She didn't know that one decision, made in the rain and the dark, in a moment when no one else would have acted, was about to unravel everything she thought she knew. She didn't know the hotel she worked so hard to keep afloat was sitting on top of a criminal enterprise. She didn't know the man she just saved was about to hand her the keys to a collapsing empire. All she knew was that someone needed help, and she didn't look away. That's where it started, with a mop bucket, a rain-soaked street, and a choice that would echo far beyond that quiet, crumbling lobby. Danielle Hart expected nothing unusual on the Thursday after the rain, but fate arrived at noon wearing a charcoal suit and carrying a debt nobody else could see. Harrison Vale stepped through the tarnished brass doors of the Rosebridge Inn, as if they belonged to him, because technically they did. Gone was the man she had yanked from a gutter at 3:12 a.m. In his place stood a billionaire, with posture so perfect it made the lobby's crooked chandelier look even more ashamed. Danielle had been refilling the burnt orange candy dish at the front desk when she caught his reflection in the cracked mirror. Her first instinct was to duck behind the counter. Her second was to stand tall, because people who rescue strangers in $1,000 coats shouldn't have to hide from them in broad daylight. Harrison removed his rain-gray gloves one finger at a time, scanned the lobby's peeling wallpaper, then fixed his gaze on her name tag. "Ms. Hart," he said, the words smooth as silk and twice as expensive. "I owe you a debt I'm not sure I can repay." She folded her arms, partly to look confident, partly to keep her heart from knocking over the candy dish. "You're walking, talking, and apparently shopping for new gloves," she replied. "Seems like the bill's settled." He offered a thin smile, set his attached case on the check-in desk, and unlatched the brass clasp. Inside lay a leather folder, thick with documents and finished with an engraved fountain pen. "I'm not here to reimburse you," he said. "I'm here to transfer ownership of this property into your name." Danielle blinked, certain she had misheard. The lobby went silent. Even the humming fluorescent tube above felt as if it had stopped mid-flicker. She thought about the broken ice machine, the drafty guest rooms, the overdue linen invoices that kept her up at night. She thought about the algebra of her life: one paycheck, 3 bills, 0 safety net, and the absurd idea that someone could stroll in and rearrange the numbers for fun. "No," she said, at last, shaking her head. "That's ridiculous." "It's paperwork," he countered. "Ridiculous is relative." He explained in precise legal language how he'd purchased the Rosebridge Inn 5 years earlier through an investment arm called Vale Capital Hospitality, how the property had hemorrhaged cash under a parade of negligent managers, and how he'd planned to liquidate the asset at a tax-advantage loss until Danielle Hart dragged him out of the street. That selfless act, Ms. Hart reminded me that the world isn't solely numbers on a ledger. Consider this a pivotal act of stewardship. She wanted to laugh some pivot. She wanted to shout that billionaires didn't just hand over hotels to night shift clerks. She wanted to ask what he really wanted. But the staff elevator dinged and two housekeepers stepped out mid-conversation, and Danielle realized this surreal negotiation was happening in front of an audience. So she said the only honest thing she could summon, "I need time." "You'll have it," Harrison replied. He tapped the folder once, like a judge striking a gavel, then walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of bergamot and inevitability. That evening, Danielle carried the folder to her studio apartment above the laundromat on Willis Avenue. She didn't own a proper desk, so she cleared last month's utility bills off the kitchen counter, brewed a pot of bitter diner coffee, and began to read. The documents were staggeringly thorough: deed transfer, tax affidavits, vendor ledgers, insurance policies, and an executive summary of the hotel's financial health. Buried in the footnotes was a line item that stopped her cold Briarstone holdings, facility maintenance $4950 recurring. She'd never seen anyone from Briarstone. She'd never approved that payment, yet the charge appeared on the books every quarter just under the threshold that would trigger a secondary approval from the parent company's auditors. Her stomach tightened. She flipped another page. Nash Financial Consulting Security System Audit. $4,925 recurring. Same pattern. Different shell. She read until dawn, highlighting anomalies: ghost vendors, suspicious wire routing numbers, duplicate invoices that differed only in date. By sunrise, she had a sickening hypothesis: the hotel wasn't failing by accident. It was being bled on purpose. Danielle arrived for work that night with circles under her eyes and a yellow legal pad filled with question marks. While the lobby slept, she logged into the outdated accounting software, cross-referenced vendor addresses, and discovered half the companies were registered to P.O. boxes in Delaware. The other half didn't exist outside Rosebridge spreadsheets. That was confirmation enough. Someone, maybe several someones, had turned the hotel into a laundromat for dirty money. How much? Hard to tell. Why here? Because no one was watching until now. Friday, she gathered every employee in the break room: Ramon at the front desk, Letitia and Grace from housekeeping, Earl the maintenance guru, who could coax heat from a boiler last inspected during the Bush administration. With hands trembling yet voice clear, she laid out her findings. At first, the staff stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. Then Earl muttered, "I knew those elevator repairs were fishy and the dam broke." Stories poured out: late-night deliveries, signed by managers who never showed their faces. Mystery technicians testing systems that never worked right afterward. Rooms blocked off for executive guests who never signed the register. Danielle wrote it all down. She felt like a detective in a film noir, except the lighting was bad and she was out of popcorn and courage at the same time. The threats began the next week. A fire inspector cited the inn for a non-compliant extinguisher, one Danielle had personally replaced a month earlier. A health inspector showed up the day after, found a rodent dropping by the ice machine, and threatened to shut them down. Earl swore the pellet looked staged, too round, too neat. Then a letter arrived: no return address, just her name in an elegant serif font. Inside, a single sentence: "Numbers can disappear, so can people." Danielle's pulse hammered, but her resolve did not break. She taped the letter to the wall above her desk: evidence. Exhausted and out of her depth, Danielle turned to journalism. Late one night, she emailed Marta King, an investigative reporter at the Bronx Herald known for toppling a crooked housing commissioner the year before. Danielle attached a zip file of spreadsheets, scanned invoices, and photographs of suspicious maintenance crews. Marta replied at 3:18 a.m. "Meet me tomorrow, 11 a.m., Cornerstone Caf, and bring originals." They met in a booth smelling a burnt espresso and inkjet receipts. Marta, mid-40s, denim jacket. Calm eyes that missed nothing paged through Danielle's stack. "This is good," she murmured. "Too good to ignore." "But is it enough?" Danielle asked. "It's never enough," Marta said, sliding the papers back. "But it's a start. Whose toes are we stepping on?" Danielle hesitated, then mentioned a name she had found hidden behind 2 layers of LLC ownership: Vincent Kane. A real estate developer with rumored mob ties. Kane kept a low profile, but his fingerprints were on Briarstone, Nash Financial, and 4 other shells. Marta's eyebrows lifted. I've sniffed around Kane's orbit before, she said. He's slippery. If he's laundering through your hotel, you're in the blast zone. Danielle exhaled. I'm already there. Monday morning, the front desk phone rang. A voice male, smooth as black ice, Ms. Hart. This is Vincent Kane. I believe we have mutual interests. She swallowed. Unless your interest is legitimate guest service, we don't. A chuckle empty of humor. All I ask is discretion. Hand over the documents Marta King took, and your little inn gets an overdue facelift. Refuse, and the next fire inspector might find more than paperwork to shut you down. Danielle fought to keep her tone neutral. We're fully compliant, Mr. Kane. For now, he murmured. Then the line clicked dead. She hung up, hands shaking, and marched straight to Earl. Change every lock, she ordered. Tonight. Then she typed a staff memo, Emergency Security Protocol Alpha. If Kane wanted a fight, he'd get one, but on her terms. She sent scanned copies of the threat letter and a summary of the phone call to Marta and BCC them to Harrison Vale, because if he had planted her in this minefield, he could at least help disarm it. That night, Harrison returned. No entourage, just him, in a guarded expression. Danielle met him in the manager's office amid stacks of color-coded binders. I didn't know, he opened before she could speak. I swear. Your name is on the deed, she shot back. Your lawyers wired money to maintain a criminal frontierance isn't an excuse. He lowered his eyes. I see that now. Tell me how to fix it. She leaned forward. You can start by funding a forensic audit. Give Marta's team everything: tax returns, holding company charts, private email archives. Next, you stand in front of a camera and admit you abandoned due diligence. And finally, she pointed to the cracked ceiling. You pay these people what they're worth. Harrison looked at the water stain overhead, then at Danielle, and nodded once, like a man signing his own confession. 48 hours later, Marta published her piece. Front page above the fold, Bronx Hotel at heart of $40 million laundering scheme developer, Vincent Kane implicated. The article quoted Danielle by name, printed copies of forged invoices, and detailed Vale Capital's gross negligence. Within minutes, NYPD issued search warrants. By sunset, cable news anchors debated how deep the scandal went. By dawn, 2 mid-level accountants at Briarstone turned state's evidence, and Vincent Kane's lawyers began negotiations. Chaos erupted at the Rosebridge Inn, but it was the good kind. Reporters set up tripods near the stoop, local pastors offered prayers, and neighborhood activists delivered donuts in solidarity. Booking spike people wanted to sleep in the place that took on the mob. Danielle and her crew scrambled to patch rooms, scrub halls, and replace the lobby carpet that smelled perpetually of yesterday's leaks. Yet victory had a cost. 2 nights after the article, Danielle found her car windows smashed a brick on the driver's seat, wrapped in duct tape, reading, "Stay humble." The police took a report and promised patrols, but fear followed her home like a stray dog. She installed motion lights outside her apartment, double-bolted the door, kept a baseball bat by the bed. Courage and caution, she learned, could live in the same heartbeat. Weeks passed. Search warrants multiplied. So did subpoenas. Harrison threw his weight behind the cleanup, paying back wages, funding security cameras, going on record about the moral duty of capital. Stock analysts labeled him reckless. Internet commenters called him performative. Danielle didn't care. She cared about the staff's new healthcare plan, the boiler Earl finally replaced, and the teenager from the block who now worked evenings, saving tips for community college. Then came the morning Marta called, voice vibrating with urgency. Kane's been indicted. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, the whole menu. Danielle closed her eyes, relief washing over her like sunlight after an endless storm. But Marta kept talking. Indictment's good, but it's the trial that matters. They'll try to paint you as a disgruntled employee who made convenient copies. Defense attorneys love mud. Be ready. I will, Danielle said, though her stomach lurched at the prospect of a witness stand. She prepared the way she did everything, methodically. She documented every shift log, every repair order, every suspicious visit. She rehearsed testimony with Marta and a pro bono attorney from the Bronx Legal Collective. She read case law at 2 a.m., then brewed coffee so strong it could file its own taxes. And somewhere between Exhibits C and D, she realized what had changed. She wasn't just protecting a building. She was protecting a principle that places and people written off as too small to matter were exactly where justice began. Trial opened in a marble courthouse downtown. Cameras flashed. Bailiffs barked, and Danielle took the stand in a navy blazer borrowed from Ramon's aunt. Kane's attorney tried to rattle her. Ms. Hart, isn't it true you stood to gain financially from increased bookings once these allegations became public? She met his gaze. I stood to gain a safe workplace, sir. Answer the question. I did, she said, voice even. Safety is priceless. The gallery murmured. The judge tapped his gavel. 2 weeks of testimony unraveled Kane's empire. Accountants traced funds from a casino in Atlantic City to a nightclub in Miami, then through Nash Financial into the Rosebridge Inn's maintenance budget, where invoices were inflated fees, laundered and cash kicked back via courier envelopes. Danielle's name appeared on exactly none of it, but her fingerprints were on every piece of evidence that survived. By closing arguments, even the bailiffs looked convinced. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Kane's shoulders sagged. Danielle's Rosebridge family exhaled in unison. Outside reporters shoved microphones toward her, lights glaring. What do you say to people who claim you were lucky? She thought of the rain, the hooded men, the brick through her window. If luck means refusing to stay silent, she said, then I wish more people were lucky. Back at the hotel, Earl had rigged a live stream of the verdict on an ancient flat screen in the lobby. When the camera showed Danielle walking free, the staff cheered, and guests joined in, even the bride checking in for a budget honeymoon. Someone popped a bottle of discount champagne, spraying ceiling tiles that still demanded replacement. It didn't matter. Cleanup could wait a day. That night, Danielle called a staff meeting. She stood under the chandelier. They'd fixed its wobble, but kept its dents a reminder, and announced a rebrand, the Rosebridge House. Not an inn, not a hotel, but a house, because houses belong to people, not investors. She unveiled a plan for community events: Tuesday, poetry nights; Thursday, GED tutoring; Saturday, jazz brunch featuring local musicians. She announced a partnership with a Bronx tech boot camp to train residents in hospitality IT. And she promised profit sharing once they cleared their first solvent quarter. The team applauded until their palms stung. Weeks later, a sleek black car parked discreetly at dusk, and Harrison Vale emerged with a folder, No lawyers, no cameras. They met in the renovated reading lounge, where secondhand armchairs framed a faux marble fireplace. I told you I'd repay my debt, he said, handing her notarized papers transferring full land title, not just the building. No covenants, no clawbacks. Clean slate, he added. She signed, hands steady this time. When he left, she watched through the bay window as his car merged into traffic and vanished like a comma in a long sentence. She didn't feel gratitude. She felt equilibrium. The balance of the world had nudged slightly toward fair. With ownership settled, Danielle turned to legacy. She enlisted Letitia's cousin, a muralist, to paint the exterior, with scenes from Bronx history, jazz legends, civil rights marches, block party joy. She partnered with the corner bodega to host first job workshops for teens. She converted the dusty basement into a food pantry annex run by Earl on Sundays. The neighbors stopped calling the place that old inn and started calling it the big house with the lantern light. At night, when the sun dipped behind Manhattan's distant skyline, a warm amber glow flooded through newly installed stained glass panels in the lobby, casting patterns on the sidewalk like a promise. One evening, Marta King dropped by, unannounced, voice recorder in hand. How does it feel, she asked, to transform a crime scene into a sanctuary? Danielle considered the question, eyes drifting to a family checking in for a budget vacation. 2 kids skipping around, luggage parents smiling despite exhaustion. It feels unfinished, she said. Sanctuaries need caretakers, and caretakers never clock out. Marta smiled, clicked off the recorder, and hugged her. Keep the light on, she whispered. I will, Danielle replied. And she does. Every night at precisely 9:00 p.m., Danielle walks the corridors, greeting guests by name, peeking into the boiler room to thank Earl, refilling the candy dish with fresh peppermints. If she passes the framed front page article hanging near the stairs, she pauses, not to admire her photograph, but to remember the rain, the risk, the choice. Because justice, she knows, is not a verdict or a headline, it's a habit. And habits once formed illuminate places thought too dim to matter. So if you ever find yourself on Willis Avenue after dark, look for the lantern light above a doorway painted with history. Step inside. You'll be greeted by the quiet hum of possibility and by a woman who learned that small acts, when repeated, can turn a crumbling inn into a beacon seen for miles. She might offer you warm coffee, a map of local jazz clubs, or just a kind word for the road. Either way, you'll leave knowing that resilience isn't random. It's built one brave decision at a time. And in that simple truth lies the secret Danielle Hart fought so hard to prove. Justice doesn't need spotlights, just people who refuse to look away. By the second month under Danielle Hart's ownership, the Rosebridge house no longer resembled the place it had once been. The peeling wallpaper was gone, replaced by a hand-painted mural of golden sun rays rising over the Bronx skyline. The front desk, once cluttered with worn clipboards and outdated check-in cards, now had a digital kiosk, a hand sanitizer station, and a ceramic bowl filled with hard peppermint candies, just like Danielle's mother used to keep by her sewing machine. Guests were checking in from all 5 boroughs, and some even from out of state, just to see the hotel that took down the moneymen. Still beneath the fresh paint and the clatter of construction tools upstairs, Danielle could feel it, a low-frequency tension humming behind the walls like the inn hadn't yet exhaled. The ghosts of the past hadn't vanished. They'd just gone quiet. By now, her schedule was a choreography of controlled chaos. Mornings started at 6:30 with vendor calls, real ones, not shell corporations. Then walkthroughs with Earl to inspect the boiler or assess whether room 308's ceiling fan had finally stopped wobbling. Afternoons involved back-to-back staff meetings, grant paperwork, city inspections, or press inquiries. Danielle had become fluent in a language she never meant to learn: compliance codes, hospitality, licensing, nonprofit zoning. But despite all the external motion, the nights were the hardest. That's when the lobby emptied out and she'd sit alone in the office, still called operations, though most of her team now referred to it as the bridge. That's where she started noticing patterns again. Not in the numbers this time, but in the people. There was Mr. Alvarez, a widower who'd taken to reading newspapers by the fireplace every morning, offering unsolicited stock tips to the front desk staff. There was the group of teenage girls who snuck into the public Wi-Fi zone to study for their GEDs. There was little Gracie Palmer, age 6, who thought the elevator was magic and left sticky notes with smiley faces for housekeeping. Slowly, Danielle realized the hotel had evolved into something more than a safe haven. It had become a neighborhood's reflection, and like any reflection, it revealed what most people preferred to hide. One Thursday afternoon, as Danielle was reviewing potential candidates for a weekend concierge role, a name popped out on the application list: Thomas Bell. She froze. Thomas had once worked under the former manager, Carl, the very man who'd enabled the money laundering scheme. Thomas wasn't high-ranking, but his signature appeared on invoices tied to Nash Financial. Danielle called Earl. "You remember," Thomas. Earl grunted. "Tall guy, cheap cologne, never made eye contact. What about him? He just applied for a job." "A beat. You gonna call the cops or call him and Danielle?" Exhaled slowly. "I'm gonna call him in." Thomas arrived 2 days later for the interview. He wore a wrinkled dress shirt, held a manila folder of references, and avoided her eyes the entire time. When she asked why he'd left the Rosebridge the first time, he fumbled. "Carl let me go," he mumbled. "Said business was down. I didn't ask questions." Danielle studied his face. His voice lacked defiance, but it also lacked the urgency of someone who had nothing to hide. "Did you know what he was doing?" she asked flatly. Thomas swallowed. "I knew something was off. People coming in late, paperwork not matching. But I was 22. Rent was due. I didn't ask questions." "You said that already." He looked up finally. "Look, I get it. I wouldn't trust me either. But I've been driving Lyft and mopping gym floors for 2 years. I just want a chance to do something real." Danielle leaned back. She thought about second chances, the kind no one gave her. She thought about how close she'd come to losing everything because someone like Thomas didn't speak up. "Can you start with weekends only?" she asked. He blinked. "Wait, really, minimum wage? Trial basis. One mistake, you're out." He nodded quickly. "Understood." "Then congratulations," she said, standing. "You just joined the crew. Don't screw it up." After he left, Danielle sat in the office for nearly 20 minutes, staring at the door. Part of her wanted to believe that redemption wasn't a myth. The other part wondered if she'd just let the past walk right back in, wearing a fresh shirt and a nervous smile. The next week proved her gamble wasn't in vain, at least not yet. Thomas showed up early, stayed late, and cleaned the vending machines without being asked. He took notes during front desk training and even offered to help Letitia's teenage son write his college essays. Danielle didn't forget his past, but she didn't weaponize it either. Forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing not to be chained to someone else's mistake. Meanwhile, the rest of the world kept spinning. Marta King's articles were now being taught in journalism classes at NYU. Harrison Vale had announced a new foundation supporting small businesses in overlooked neighborhoods, though Danielle suspected it was part PR, part penance. And as for Vincent Kane, he remained locked in pretrial hearings, refusing to cooperate with prosecutors, his empire crumbling from the inside. But Rosebridge wasn't done revealing its secrets. One night, Letitia found a hidden panel in the basement behind the old laundry chute. Inside, a dusty steel box filled with faded receipts, burner phone bills, and one crumpled photograph. Danielle examined the image under the desk lamp. Four men in suits standing in front of a construction site. One of them was Carl. One was unmistakably Vincent Kane. The third was a city building inspector currently employed by the Department of Urban Development. Danielle scanned the receipts and notes, then emailed everything to Marta. Within hours, the journalist was back at the hotel, this time with a mini camera crew. If this connects a public official to Kane's laundering, it widens the case, opens the door to federal charges, she said. Danielle nodded. Then let's open the door. The article dropped the following: Monday city official tied to Bronx laundering ring. Rosebridge documents shed new light. The impact was immediate. Protests outside the department, subpoenas, press conferences. For days, Danielle couldn't walk past the newsstand without seeing her hotel on the cover. But it wasn't just headlines anymore. It was systemic. It was about how corruption had been layered so deeply into forgotten neighborhoods that no one had thought to die gun till she did. And now others were starting to follow. Danielle was invited to speak at a Bronx community panel on transparency in local government. She wore her one good blazer borrowed from Marta and spoke in a steady, quiet voice. We didn't fix the Rose Bridge by being experts. We fixed it by paying attention. The minute people stop assuming that corruption is someone else's problem, that's when things change. The audience gave a standing ovation. Danielle returned to the hotel that night and found the entire staff waiting with a peach cobbler baked from her mother's recipe. Earl lit a single candle in the center and said, "For the boss lady who made us believe again." Danielle laughed, then cried, then ate 3 slices. And yet, even with the wind stacking up, she never stopped scanning the shadows. Trauma has a long tail. She checked locks twice, backup drives thrice, and kept emergency folders labeled incident protocols, just in case. Because people don't just disappear quietly, and power doesn't like being challenged. Then came the invitation. An executive producer from a major streaming network emailed her a formal proposal. We're interested in adapting your story for television, a limited series exploring justice, resilience, and redemption in forgotten America. Danielle blinked at the screen. She reread it twice. It felt absurd, then surreal, then real. She called Marta. "What do I do? You tell your story your way," Marta replied. "But don't sell the truth for drama." Danielle nodded. No heroes, no made-up villains, just the truth. Exactly. And whatever they offer, the Rosebridge comes first. She said no to the first offer, yes to the second, but only after negotiating a full scholarship fund for local students to be included in the deal. She called it the Lantern Fellowship, named after the mural on the east wall of the hotel that now glowed at night with solar-powered lights. By month 5, the Rosebridge House wasn't just a building. It was a movement. Local teachers brought in classes for field trips. Nearby restaurants partnered for pop-up brunches. A nonprofit used the ballroom every Friday night to host coding workshops. Danielle launched a job training program for domestic abuse survivors. She started mentoring at-risk youth. She even offered free coffee to journalists, real ones, and taught staff how to identify fake inspectors. And the hotel kept filling, room by room, story by story. One Saturday morning, she stood on the rooftop, garden still, unfinished but thriving, and looked out over the Bronx. The sun rose golden over the skyline, and the air smelled like basil and asphalt. Earl walked up beside her and handed her a coffee. "You did it," he said. She smiled. "No," she said, glancing back at the hotel filled with people who had built this place beside her. "We did. 3 months after the scandal broke wide open and the Rosebridge house emerged from the ashes of corruption, Danielle Hart got a phone call that stopped her mid-sentence in a supply order meeting. It was from Deputy Mayor Evelyn Brooks, someone Danielle had only seen in press conferences and Sunday talk shows. Her voice, smooth and diplomatic, carried more weight than the words themselves. "We're forming a special commission on systemic corruption and community oversight," she said. "Your name came up more than once." Danielle blinked. "I run a hotel." "No," Evelyn replied, "you rebuilt a community. We'd like you to serve as a civilian advisor. We need real-world voices at the table. Yours matters." Danielle said nothing for a beat. Then she murmured, "I'll need to think about it." That night she sat in the rooftop garden beside Earl, watching the last rays of sun stretch across the South Bronx skyline. "They want me to sit on a government commission," she said. Earl didn't respond right away. He reached for a weed growing between the tomato plants and yanked it out with a grunt. "They finally realized you're dangerous." She laughed. "That's one word for it." "You gonna do it?" "I don't know," she replied honestly. "What if it's just for show, a photo op? Something they check off a list and forget?" Earl sipped his iced tea and looked at her. "Then show up and make it unforgettable." The next morning, Danielle accepted the invitation. The commission meetings were held twice a week at City Hall mahogany tables, stale coffee, and people in suits who smiled with their mouths but rarely with their eyes. Danielle sat among former judges, city planners, ethics professors, and one ex-cop turned activist. She was the only one in the room who still clocked into a job that required scrubbing vending machines when they jammed. At first they underestimated her, called her Miss Hart, talked over her, referred to her hotel as a unique anomaly. But by week 3, Danielle had read every prior audit the city had ignored, cross-referenced vendor procurement logs with the same techniques she used to expose Briarstone, and presented a 3-slide breakdown showing how one Department of Sanitation contract routed $700,000 through a company registered to an empty lot in Yonkers. The room went quiet. Deputy Mayor Brooks leaned forward. "Ms. Hart, would you be willing to lead a subcommittee on vendor accountability?" Danielle simply nodded. "As long as it doesn't pull me away from my hotel. That's still my first job." "Understood," the deputy mayor replied. But not everyone was pleased. A week later, a familiar face appeared in the crowd at a public commission hearing. Vincent Kane, seated 2 rows from the front, dressed in a navy suit and wearing a calm smile that curled with calculation. Danielle's heart didn't race. It steadied. After the meeting, he approached. "You've done well for yourself," he said casually, as if they were old friends catching up over wine. Danielle held his gaze. "And you've done well staying out of prison for now." He chuckled, hands in his pockets. "Trials are tedious, but I always admired your fire. I'm just here to observe." "No, Vincent," she said flatly. "You're here to intimidate." He leaned in, slightly voice dropping. "And if I were, you'd run to the press again, call your journalist friend, make me into the next headline." Danielle stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "No, I'd let the truth finish what it started." Vincent's eyes narrowed. He said nothing more, simply turned and walked away, but Danielle didn't move until his figure disappeared down the corridor. That night back at the Rosebridge house, she called a full staff meeting. "This place was born in fire," she began. "We're not just running a hotel, we're standing on the front lines of something bigger. And the people who ran from accountability are starting to circle back. We don't flinch, we don't cave, and we never ever shrink from the truth." They nodded. Carla from housekeeping, Earl from maintenance, Thomas at the front desk, even Letitia's son, who now ran weekend check-ins. Every person in that room had fought for this place in one way or another. Later that week, a local college invited Danielle to speak at their criminal justice symposium. She wore a navy dress and spoke with clarity, not perfection, but honesty that silenced the room. When people say corruption is too big to fight, they're really saying they don't believe in people like me. People without titles, without shields, without the right last name. But justice isn't a ladder, it's a line. And sometimes you just have to draw it. The applause was thunderous. A retired judge shook her hand afterward. "You have no idea how rare it is for someone outside the system to shake it so hard." She smiled. Maybe it needed shaking. Meanwhile, the Rosebridge house continued to grow, not just as a hotel, but as a living, breathing community space. The GED tutoring program expanded into full adult education classes. The ballroom became a venue for Friday night jazz and Sunday interfaith meditation circles. Children came after school to use the Wi-Fi and eat snacks donated by local bakeries. And through it all, Danielle watched over it not as a CEO or executive director, but as a caretaker. The hallway lights, the staff meetings, the endless paperwork. Each task was a thread in the tapestry of restoration she'd spent months weaving. But her peace would once again be tested. One evening, as she reviewed security footage from a newly installed camera near the basement access door, she noticed something strange. A man, unidentified, trying to force the latch with a screwdriver. He wore gloves, a baseball cap. Moved with precision. She froze the frame. It wasn't Kane, but someone working for him, maybe? Danielle printed the footage and turned it over to the NYPD's local liaison, who confirmed her instincts. The man was tied to a private security firm that had once worked under a shell contract for Kane's company. The intimidation hadn't stopped. It had just changed shape. She increased overnight patrols, added motion sensor lights around the rear entrance, and on Marta's advice submitted a full dossier to the district attorney's office. Danielle didn't speak publicly about the break-in attempt. She didn't want fear to write the next chapter. But she did gather the staff that Friday and say, if they think they can shake us with shadows they forgot, we've lived in the dark before, and we know how to build light. 1 week later, the Lantern Fellowship, her scholarship program, officially launched. 5 students from local high schools received full grants to study hospitality, business, or social work. The ceremony was small but heartfelt. Parents cried. The students beamed. Danielle gave each one a compass. You don't need directions, she said. You just need to remember who you are and where you won't let the world push you. That night, as she locked the lobby and walked through the quiet halls of the Rosebridge house, Danielle felt something she hadn't in months: stillness. Not silence, not tension, just stillness. The kind that comes when a storm has passed and the walls are still standing. Word of what happened at the Rosebridge house didn't stay in the Bronx. At first it was small things, a guest from Philadelphia, leaving a handwritten note in the comment box saying they planned to take Danielle's staffing model back to their family-owned motel. Then came an email from a high school principal in Newark asking if she'd be willing to do a Zoom call with students learning about civic leadership. Danielle agreed, of course. It was only 20 minutes, but the kids listened like she was the president of the United States. And then came the letter from Chicago, typed on official letterhead from the Midwest Community Redevelopment Alliance. It opened with one sentence that froze her mid-step. We believe your model could change everything. They wanted her to fly out, speak on a panel, and tour 3 underperforming hotels in the Southside properties at risk of being shut down or sold off to corporate developers. The tone was not patronizing. It was respectful, collaborative, and hopeful. Danielle had never been to Chicago. She had barely left New York in the last 2 years. But Earl smiled when she told him, if they're asking you to teach it, means they're finally ready to learn. She boarded the plane wearing her one nice coat and carrying a leather-bound folder of Rosebridge's transition plan, staffing structures, vendor vetting protocols, grant templates, and community outreach timelines. She had written it out by hand before typing it because the act of writing grounded her and reminded her who this was really for. When she arrived, the wind off Lake Michigan nearly knocked her over, but the welcome was warm. The panel was hosted in a converted school auditorium, packed with local business owners, housing activists, and a handful of tired but attentive city officials. She took the mic last, introduced simply as Danielle Hartowner of the Rosebridge house in the Bronx. There were no flashy slides, no buzzwords, just her voice measured, honest, and full of lived experience. I didn't rebuild a hotel, she began. I rebuilt trust. The crowd went still. I didn't do it alone. And I didn't do it because I had a title. I did it because no one else would. And when people, especially in forgotten neighborhoods, see that someone's willing to hold the line, they step up too. They don't want to be saved. They want to be seen. They want a stake. When she stepped off stage, 2 reporters followed her, then 3 more. Then a local nonprofit leader asked if she'd consider licensing her training materials. By the time she returned to New York, her inbox had over 200 messages, including one from a former HUD regional advisor asking for a private consultation. But the ripple effect wasn't just geographic. Back home, the Rosebridge house was becoming a pilgrimage site for educators, reformers, and dreamers alike. More than a hotel, it was being studied, its hallway bulletin boards photographed by graduate students, its Saturday youth brunch clubs written up in social impact journals. One morning, a young woman from Baltimore named Renee checked in under a fake name. Danielle only realized something was off when she caught her sketching the mural in the east hallway in tears. Sorry, Renee said, I didn't want to make a thing of it. I work for a city grant office. I came to see if this place was real. Danielle sat down beside her and offered a coffee. It's real. The change is slow, messy, and sometimes painful. But it's real. Renee looked at her eyes glassy. I've been buried under spreadsheets so long I forgot what community actually looks like. Danielle smiled. Then welcome back. But not all eyes watching Rosebridge were friendly. In late March, Danielle received an unmarked envelope with a printed article inside. No return address, no handwriting. Just a clipping from a small political blog featuring an opinion piece titled, "The Dangerous Myth of the Redeemer, Why We Should Be Wary of Danielle Hart." It was filled with coded language suggesting she'd overstepped, that she was gaining too much influence too fast, that maybe she had her own agenda. Danielle tossed it aside at first, but then 3 days later, her mother's assisted living center received a call from a block number claiming Danielle was under federal investigation. A lie, of course. But the intent was clear: shake the ground beneath her. She met Marta for lunch and handed over the envelope. This feels different, Danielle admitted. Less intimidation, more narrative control. Marta frowned. They're trying to preempt your legacy. You embarrass the old guard. They want to discredit you before your ideas take root in places they can't control. Danielle looked out the window of the cafe. Then it's time I speak louder than they ever expected. 2 weeks later, she delivered the keynote address at the Civic Impact Summit in D.C. The ballroom was packed. The attendees included policymakers, former mayors, community organizers, and corporate social responsibility reps from Fortune 500 companies. She stood under the spotlight wearing a green blouse and a quiet defiance and said, "People didn't show up to save the Rosebridge house. We showed up for each other. And when institutions failed, we became the institution we needed. That's not heroism. That's survival with structure. That's what we call justice." The speech went viral. A clip of her quote aired on the evening news. Suddenly, the same pundits who once ignored her were debating her in prime time. Was she a visionary or a disruption leader or a liability? Some called her a saint, others a symbol of misguided liberalism. Danielle ignored them all. She focused instead on what was next, and that's when the final confrontation came. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Bronx skyline, she returned to the hotel after a long meeting with the city council. There was a man waiting in the lobby, tailored suit, quiet eyes, a face she hadn't seen in months. Vincent Kane. She stopped cold. He stood slowly, unthreatening. No cameras, no threats. "I just want to talk." Danielle nodded toward the office. "1 minute, then I call security." He followed her into the office and sat on the edge of the guest chair. "I'm losing everything," he said plainly. "Properties, investors, partners, they're walking away." Danielle crossed her arms. "Sounds fair." He looked up. "You didn't just expose me. You made me irrelevant." "That wasn't the goal," she replied, "but I'm not sorry." Vincent chuckled bitterly. "You know what I regret? Not paying attention to you sooner." "You saw me," she said. "You just didn't think I mattered." Silence. Finally, he asked, "What do you want from me?" She thought for a moment, then answered, "I want you to testify, in full, against everyone." He stared at her. "They'll bury me." "They already are," she said. "At least this way your story ends with a little truth." He said nothing, then nodded once. "You'll get it." 3 weeks later, Vincent Kane flipped. His deposition named 3 elected officials, 2 police officers, and 5 business associates tied to laundering through low-income communities. Danielle wasn't in the courtroom when it happened. She was with Letitia, helping her daughter pick out a prom dress. "Someone else can finish that part," she said. "We've got enough to build." By summer, the Rosebridge house was profiled in the Atlantic under the title, "The Place That Refused to Stay Quiet." Danielle read it once, then folded it up and slid it into the drawer in the office marked "Proof." That night, she hosted the first ever community gala on the rooftop garden. Jazz music played, elderly couples danced, kids ran between picnic tables. Teachers and nurses and barbers from around the block shared drinks and stories like family. Danielle took the mic briefly. I know there's still more to fix, but tonight we rest because we've earned it. The crowd cheered, and under the lantern light that now glowed brighter than ever, Danielle Hart allowed herself something she hadn't truly felt in a long time: peace. And not the kind that comes from winning, the kind that comes from planting something that will last. Summer passed gently in the South Bronx. The rooftop garden at the Rosebridge house was in full bloom: basil, tomatoes, lavender. The mural on the east wall had faded just slightly in the sun, and children now drew hopscotch squares beneath it with neon chalk. The hotel hummed with energy. Danielle Hart, however, stood still. Her name was everywhere. Newspapers called her the civic fire starter. College students wrote thesis papers about her. Activists invited her to headline rallies. Foundations offered grants for her to build a Danielle Hart Leadership Institute. And every time she opened her inbox, another documentary crew pitched a project. The attention was flattering but exhausting. Because Danielle never built the Rosebridge house to become famous. She built it because no one else would. One afternoon, while sorting linens with Carla, she paused mid-fold. Do you ever wonder if I should be doing more? Carla didn't look up. You mean like running for office or fixing the whole country? Danielle smirked. Something like that. Carla shrugged. I think you already are. You just do it one hallway at a time. That night she sat alone in the old manager's office, now remodeled but still smelling faintly of lemon polish and lavender oil. A letter sat on the desk unopened. It was from a prominent national nonprofit asking her to leave the Bronx for a year and lead a series of grassroots reform labs in other struggling cities. It paid more than she'd ever seen on paper. It came with a car, an assistant, an apartment in D.C., but it also meant stepping away, leaving the soil shed bled into. Danielle stared at the letter for a long time, then closed the office door, turned off her phone, and walked the hallways of the hotel. She stopped by room 206, where Mrs. Dawson had just finished her weekly art therapy group. She peeked into the library nook, where two teenagers quietly argued over which Toni Morrison book to present at book club. She nodded at Miguel, who was adjusting a broken door hinge without being asked. This was the work, the real work. She could build blueprints elsewhere, but she had built roots here. The next morning she made her decision. She invited the entire staff to the rooftop, everyone from night janitors to community volunteers. Someone asked me recently why I'm still here, she began, voice clear over the hum of the city. Why I haven't moved on to something bigger. She let the question linger. The truth is, this is the big thing. Right here. This garden. These walls. These faces. I didn't start a revolution. I started over. And I'd rather stay here and get that right than go somewhere else just to be seen. They clapped, not like an audience, but like a family. After the meeting, she returned to the office and penned a letter back to the foundation in D.C. Thank you for the honor, but my work isn't done where I am. Let this be the model, not the exception. And if you truly want change, come walk with us. She mailed it, then exhaled. In the weeks that followed, things settled, not into boredom, but into rhythm. She launched a mentorship circle for young girls in the neighborhood. She partnered with the local community college to start a hospitality internship track. She opened the Lantern Room, a cafe inside the hotel that doubled as a free co-working space during weekday mornings. The hotel still had its challenges: leaky faucets, occasional disputes, tight budgets. But Danielle didn't mind, because the weight of the work felt right in her hands, like a shovel, not a spotlight. One evening, as she swept the sidewalk outside the entrance, an older man in a crisp cap passed by and tipped it toward her. Ms. Hart, he said, thank you for bringing this block back to life. Danielle smiled. We did it together. He chuckled. No, Mom, we showed up. You believed it was worth it. And as the sun dipped low behind the mural wall and the first lantern lights flickered on above the hotel's entrance, Danielle Hart understood that legacy wasn't something you chased. It was something you cultivated. Every day, every name, every choice. Autumn arrived quietly in the South Bronx. The trees lining Willis Avenue turned amber and gold, and children began walking to school with jackets zipped halfway up. Inside the Rosebridge house, the warmth wasn't just from the radiators. It was in the voices, the laughter, the rhythm of something fully alive. Danielle Hart stood by the front window sipping her evening chamomile tea as the street lamp outside flickered on. It had been 1 year, almost to the day, since the night she dragged a stranger out of the rain. 1 year since she refused to look away. So much had changed. The hotel now ran community dinners every Sunday. It had a free pantry at the back and a rotating art gallery in the hallway outside the laundry room. Staff turnover was down to zero, and every Friday Earl hosted a workshop called Fixing What's Broken, which sometimes referred to boilers and sometimes didn't. Danielle no longer needed to oversee every detail. She had built a team that believed not because she told them to, but because she showed them how. One evening, while cleaning out a supply closet, she found the folder where Harrison Vale had once left the deed to the building. She sat with it in her lap, ran her fingers over its worn edges, and smiled. A few days later, she placed it in a glass case by the lobby with a simple plaque. This is how change begins, not with wealth or power or permission, but with one person choosing not to walk away. Guests stopped to read it. Some left notes beside it. Others just nodded and continued walking a little slower, a little more aware. Danielle's legacy wasn't made from speeches or spotlights. It was built from door hinges that no longer squeaked, from teens who now knew how to write a ersum, from neighbors who started waving again after years of silence. Late one night, she sat with Carla and Earl on the rooftop, wrapped in blankets, sipping cider. "You think the world knows what you've done?" Carla asked. Danielle looked up at the city skyline. "I don't need it to. The block knows. The kids know. That's enough." A pause. The wind stirred. The lantern light above the mural flickered once, then steadied, just like it always had. Danielle smiled. "Besides, she said we didn't build this to be remembered." She looked around them, the garden beds, the distant hum of music downstairs, the glow of community rising from what once was ruin. "We built it," she whispered, "so no one would ever be forgotten." And with that, she leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the quiet do the talking. Because some lights don't shout, they shine. Forever. Danielle Hart's journey reminds us that change doesn't always come from grand speeches or powerful title. It often begins in quiet moments when someone refuses to walk away. Her story teaches us that integrity, resilience, and everyday courage are still among the most powerful tools we have, no matter our age or station in life. For older generations who have seen the world change again and again, Danielle's actions echo something timeless, that the smallest acts of care offering help standing up. When it's hard, holding the line, when it matters, can ripple through an entire community. In a world that often feels too fast and too fractured, she shows us the value of slowing down, listening, and building something that lasts. You don't need to be famous to make an impact. You just need to care enough to begin. Whether you're mentoring a young neighbor, volunteering, or simply offering kindness in small ways, your life experience holds weight. It matters. And just like Danielle, you may not change the whole world, but you can change someone's world. And sometimes that's more than enough. If Danielle's story moved you, if her courage reminded you that one person can make a difference, don't let that light fade. Show her the support she never asked for but truly deserves. What would you say to someone who rebuilt a community from the ground up? What advice would you give her as she continues this journey? Should Danielle expand her model to other cities or keep her roots right where they are? Should she write a book, run for office, or simply keep holding the door open at the Rosebridge House? We want to hear from you. Your thoughts matter. If you believe in what Danielle stands for, drop a comment below. And if you simply love this story, comment the number 1.